Mr. Chair, we are live. Mr. Chair, we are live. Ready? We are live. We're ready.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I wasn't sure yet. We're live. Good, good. It's 9:01 on my clock, and so let's get the Crow Wing County Committee of the Whole meeting to order. First, we have the Minnesota Intercounty Association, Matt, and I think Nancy coming up to update us on what Mike is up to. Yeah.
Good morning, commissioners. I appreciate that. It is easier to work from the seated position and a table in front of me. So good morning again, Matt Mossman, Executive Director of the Minnesota Inter-County Association. With me is Nancy Selesky. You're familiar with both of us. First of all, Mr. Chair and commissioners appreciate Crow Wing County's continued membership in the Inter-County Association. We really welcome and appreciate the opportunity to get out and visit you all in person. You have a beautiful, as you all know, courthouse and building here. Having had the lifetime opportunity to lead the restoration of the Minnesota State Capitol years ago, I'm always reminded and love the Tennessee marble that is the same here as in the Capitol, along with other elements. So a lot of history to Minnesota. I want to just start off by thanking Commissioner Barrows and Commissioner Franzen for your membership and participation on the MICA Board of Directors, which is who sets our policy and direction for the work we all do on your behalf at the state capitol for our 15 member counties. We have a presentation for you today. We can go to the second slide. We typically, as you know, do a post-session review of what happened in the legislative session. It just so happens that this year with some scheduling and rescheduling, we are later in the season than we sometimes get out here. So we are gonna do a bit more dancing in this presentation because we are very clearly thinking about 2025 more than we're thinking about 2024. But in many cases, the conversation also ties together. So just at a very high level, the 2024 legislature had significant one-time upfront money that's the chart you see on the screen, had significant one-time resources available to them, but there were concern, as highlighted in the orange charts in the tails, that there was some structural imbalance in the tails, and that led leaders in the legislature to really sort of minimize expectations for what sort of permanent changes could be made in the 24 session. And so in the end of the day, the legislature made about $424 million of new changes from a budget standpoint in the 24-25 budget, and fully 25% of that, most of that was one time, fully 25% of that was the much needed $109 million for the Tyler settlement. Again, not money that went to counties, but money that was needed so that the settlement of the U.S. Supreme Court case finding Minnesota's tax forfeited land for non-payment of property taxes to be partly unconstitutional, so that didn't fall on county taxpayers to solve. Obviously, a state law. And so, in the end of the day, I'm going to talk more about this slide at the end. Those were the changes. I'm going to just, if we go to the next slide, that Tyler settlement, both funding and policy, was a huge part of the combined effort of county organizations, including MICA at the Capitol. And as you know, there was both the funding support, but also a lot of work around something that is very legally complex to put in place a new policy approach to how property tax forfeitures will happen for non-payment of tax. And of course, just as a reminder for those who might be listening, this is in Minnesota something that happens after a multi-year long process, 3 years, where counties work very diligently to help make sure property owners have the opportunity to pay taxes, to address those non-payment tax issues and continue ownership in the property. When that doesn't happen now, the law will require that there must be a sale of the property, and that sale will then be used with a few minor exceptions, but that sale of the property will then set the value in effect, and that value will be compared to the fees and penalties and past unpaid taxes, and if the value of the sale is above that amount, referred to as a surplus, there will be a claims process then that will be in place for either the property owner or other interests in the property who have claims to get resources back from that sale. Not everything got addressed in this issue, in solving this. You all know that quite often these properties are in the properties that end up in the county's hands as a result of this tax forfeiture system are oftentimes have contamination issues, demolition needs, significant cleanup costs. There's a reason oftentimes that they're being let go and that the taxes aren't being paid and the properties fall back to the county to deal with. So that's something that we most certainly will want to look at supporting, returning to the legislature this session. The good news is that it got a lot of airtime last year, a lot more understanding, a lot broader of understanding that it's an issue for counties, and so we're hoping to revisit that. If we move to the next issue, this is where I'm really want to transition to what we have been hearing from member counties, and I just welcome your feedback today, either in this setting or to follow up with us later or pull us aside after our presentation. This chart was a chart that, of all things that were being considered last session, that didn't happen, but it also very conveniently converts to a chart of things that are continued to be an interest for this upcoming session. I don't have to tell all of you that there's a lot of upward pressure on property tax levies and costs for county governments and local governments across the state, both workforce issues, salary and compensation adjustments, and also expectations that have been growing with policy changes that the state has adopted in the last couple of years. And we want to make sure, what we've been hearing is that there's an important need to revisit with the legislature what's driving some of those levy issues, and just the general need to continue to be supportive of county program aid and the state fiscal partnership. A ton of the work that counties do is work on behalf of implementing state laws and requirements, and so we are hearing that county program aid continues to be an important need. That program was started in 2004, but that's also when the legislature stopped annually inflating that amount. So just to give a little bit of an example, and my numbers will be a little bit rough here, but I did an analysis and provided it to the member counties a couple of months ago. There's about 55 counties that are going to get less county program aid in 2025 than they got in 2024. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that when the appropriation stays flat and doesn't grow with inflation and the costs of government, the formula parameters have an outsized impact on that distribution. If you just kept the appropriation consistent with the value of it, adjusted for inflation, about 5 counties would get less in 25 than they did in 24, and that is more reflective of sort of the year-to-year transition of the formula parameters. So really important to want to revisit with the legislature, keeping that appropriation level holding its value to protect the great work that the legislature did in 2023, which was a largest increase ever in county program aid at $80 million. So local sales tax for cities and counties, last year both the House and the Senate had separate proposals to allow counties and cities to impose a limited local sales tax for a defined set of capital investment projects that are typically done by either cities or counties. That legislation, there were differences between the House and the Senate. That legislation did not make it over the finish line last year. In the absence of that, as you know, historically, because of limitations with the property tax and limitations in local government aid, the access to the sales tax has become more and more a conversation over the last 20 years for local governments. But absent the transportation tax opportunity, local governments can only access the sales tax by going to the state legislature, getting special law authority to do so. This would create general law authority, and we're anticipating this to be an issue next legislative session as well. In fact, there's a meeting coming up tomorrow that I'll be attending. There's been some interim meetings with the tax chairs having conversations around what this legislation would look like. And so we really want to protect the important need for county projects like public safety facilities, like libraries, parks, trails, the things that counties do. You do fewer of the swimming pools and community centers and things like that, and really want to protect that counties have a meaningful opportunity to use this local authority if it is put in place for the work that counties do. Construction materials on sales tax will continue to be an issue in the tax bill for us as well. Local governments pay roughly $80 million a year. The estimate might come in higher now in sales tax that you pay to the state. A lot of times that's bonding projects that you might be doing construction on. So you're collecting tax to pay tax. And it's just something that has been broadly supported by local governments to make a change, by labor, by the construction industry, but it also it has a hard time getting politically over the finish line, and we want to continue working on that. So let me pause there. There are a number of other new local aid programs, increasing SCORE dollars to county governments generally is in the tax bill. So that is the area that is the bill and policy area where we really look for what is that state fiscal partnership and how can the state continue to step up to supporting the work that counties do and do oftentimes at the direction of the state government.
So I guess I've got a question on this, that sales tax. So there's people that want to propose that cities and other municipalities can do like the county board has been given the authority on the 1/2 cent sales tax for roads. Is that kind of what it is? Or is that what they're proposing?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Coring, the proposal last year, the rough outline of the proposal was that cities and or counties, so cities and counties could impose by a vote of the county board, but they would still have to be a voter referendum. So you would still have to then have a referendum locally to impose a sales tax for what would be a defined set of capital projects in the statute. So for, it included things like, well, this is partly where the House and Senate were different, but it included things like community centers, swimming pools, recreational facilities, parks and trails. One point of difference between the House and the Senate was for counties, it's really important for counties want to be able to have public safety, judicial facilities, criminal justice facilities on that list. Mm-hmm. There's some difference between the House and the Senate on that. And then it was capped at 1%. So the maximum that any county or that any city could impose was 1%. Really important also that we've prioritized is that the transportation 1/2 cent would count against that 1% cap, but it would not
Okay.
require the voter approval or a referendum. So the authority for the county to do that would remain. But if you had a half a cent or a quarter cent transportation tax, it would count against that cap.
But this is what's proposed now. I mean, that doesn't mean at the end, when it's all shakes out, they say that, oh, I guess you don't have to have a referendum. That could change, correct?
Under the proposal, you would have to have a referendum either way.
Okay.
Under what it would do, what the intent is to, there's several intents, and I think, different legislators and leaders in the legislature, I think, might have different goals, but in general, the intent is to both, instead of just limiting this to the local governments that sort of have the political influence or make the case to the legislature for a special law, for there to be greater equity. So everybody has the opportunity to access their sales tax and to have that conversation and to drive that decision process more locally within a common set of parameters. So that really is the foundational.
So the county board would have the authority for all of Crow Wing County. Brainerd would only have the authority within their boundaries.
Absolutely, and Brainerd's cap would be 1%, and then the county's cap would be a different 1%.
Same with Jenkins up in
Correct.
Jenkins, Minnesota, but they, in their
We're
boundary.
we're really worried about it up there, I'm sure. I'm sure they are. I'll have to check with them.
Interesting. So this was talked about last session. Now we might have new legislators come in, and this is still going to be on the table, you're thinking, for '25.
This was, well, both the tax shares had proposals in their bills, and I anticipate that both the tax shares will be back to the legislature. The House is,
Okay.
obviously, there's an election, and so the majorities and all of that might change, but those individuals will both be in the legislature, we anticipate, and so.
But they'll have to reintroduce this. Those
Absolutely.
bills are dead, being that this is a new biennium.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, interesting.
So, Mr. Chair, transitioning to transportation, let me first say that we have a number of transitions going on at MICA, and one of them is that Mr. Steve Novak is not with us today. Steve retired from his work with MICA at the end of September. He's in travel status right now. I think he's in retirement status right now, and I'll just say that I learned a tremendous amount from Steve. Steve was a tremendous asset to MICA. I know that I speak on his behalf that he really appreciated the opportunity to have a final visit to all of the counties, and so on his behalf, I know he would want me to add that he really enjoyed working with all of you on behalf of MICA down at the Capitol, and we stay connected to him and wish him well. The transportation report, obviously, a lot of our priorities were right in the mix until the end of session this last year, but with the lack of a bonding bill being passed on the final day of session, many of those went by the wayside. So there was a transportation policy bill that was quite non-controversial that was passed, that had a few items in it impacting counties. And there was a transportation budget bill that was passed that started with really small targets of general fund money, but also moved some money around in the bill that was appropriated in 2023 but hadn't yet been allocated. A key part of that was that as a result, there was $15 million more put into trunk highway spending and $15 million more one time put into the Corridors of Commerce program, which we strongly support. There were also some limited adjustments made to the greenhouse gas assessment language and process that was put in place as a requirement in the 2023 bill. And I think really importantly, actually, there was a permanent continuation of a technical advisory committee that county engineers are participating in, including a MICA county engineer, to provide guidance with and to the Department of Transportation as to how that's implemented. going forward. And all of the bonding proposals that didn't happen last year continue to be just critical priorities for the county this session. Funding for local road wetland replacement program. As you know, you can't do projects in the spring if we run out of wetland monies, lands to provide for that mitigation. And certainly there was no local road and bridge money. The bills that were being talked about at the end of the session, bonding bills, were going to put not as much as we were asking for, but certainly meaningful additional money into local roads and local bridges. That, of course, didn't happen, and we will continue to ask. Last year, we asked for $200 million for local roads and $250 million for local bridges, and we haven't finalized our platform yet, but I anticipate our ask to continue to be significant in that area.
Matt, do they understand as long as we keep kicking this thing down the road, the can is getting bigger and bigger because the cost is getting more and more? I mean, you know, when you look at not doing a bonding bill and then all of a sudden you do it, by the time they didn't fund it to the time they're going to fund it, the costs are going to be astronomical on some of these projects.
Commissioner and Mr. Chair, the hesitation in my voice is only I think so, but you're right. The typical pattern of passing a large bonding bill in an even numbered year and a smaller bonding bill in an odd number year has, I think, in many ways become the atypical pattern in the last decade. And certainly the majorities were working to try to bring a bipartisan bill on board in the closing days of session. I think it's always a priority for the majority party, and you know whether or not whoever that is, but it's also a significant leverage piece, and so we continue to emphasize the importance of the bonding bill, and I anticipate that it will be under consideration again this session.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to turn to Nancy and Health and Human Services.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Nancy Selesky, and I represent MICA in the area of both Public Health and Human Services, and it's good to be here this morning in Crow Wing County. I'm just going to follow along here. The first thing I would mention is the Emergency Medical Services funding. That was a bipartisan proposal. I think the need that was expressed was about $120 million. In the end, they did appropriate $30 million to the system. They also passed policy language that replaces the regulatory board with an office of emergency, a state office of emergency medical services, and those duties will be transferred to that board on January 1st of 2025. There is a task force that's been working on this for a couple of years, and they've gone around the state. They're continuing to meet. The challenge, again, is to try and find an ongoing funding source, and that's yet to be dealt with at this point. They're reviewing options at this point, but that was very much a bipartisan bill. Next item I would mention is the Minnesota African American Family Preservation Act. Again, the legislature's been working on this for quite a while. They did make some progress this year. There's two key components. First of all, DHS is establishing a pilot program in Hennepin and Ramsey counties, and that will implement the act for a 2-year period, and that is effective in January. Then under that is a working group, which is established. It includes both Hennepin and Ramsey, but also other county organizations. And at MICA's request, we were added as an appointing authority for that. So we have been working with AMC, MACSA, county attorneys to make sure that we have the right balance on that working group, that geographically and size-wise it's covered throughout the state. The appointments that MICA is making to the group is St. Louis County Commissioner Ashley Grimm and Otter Tail County Commissioner Kurt Mortensen. The group is having their first informational meeting on Thursday, the 7th of November. It's going to be a hybrid, but we intend to attend that in person and see how that goes. It's looking like it'll be about a 2-year commitment in terms of the working group. It goes into effect statewide. Again, this act goes into effect January 1st of 2027. Next item I would mention, I don't think I have to tell you that Health and Human Services can be very hard to follow. This year, there's no shortage, maybe 7 or 8 different committees that deal with different parts of this area. This year, I would start with the Children and Families portion of the budget. That was actually amended into the education bill, the Omnibus Education Bill, and signed into law separately by Governor Wells at the end of May. In terms of child protection and welfare, it does require a review of child fatalities and near fatalities and requires counties to establish local child mortality review teams. DHS is required to provide training and support to those teams. There is a new Supreme Court Council on Child Protection. DHS is directed to review the systems in other states and make recommendations on a common entry point system for reporting the initial child maltreatment. And DHS is required to develop a new IT system. It's called the Child Welfare Information System. In terms of funding, SSIS, the technology that county workers are challenged by because of the fact that they're still using green screen technology from 30 years ago. They did put $10 million into to the department. Department is to consult with counties on that, but it was just $10 million at this point. They also put $1.1 million into child care improvement grants. In terms of a couple of policy items, child care centers and family child care providers are allowed to develop a policy regarding immunizations for children over 2 months of age. There was money of $350,000 a year for a family child care ombudsperson. And one of the things that we were working on that we were disappointed was not included was there was language that would have required a child welfare fiscal analysis. We really want to push to show what the county's spend is on this area, and unfortunately that piece did get dropped at the very end. Next slide is Health and Human Services. This is it's just the Human Services Bill. This is chaired by Senator Hoffman and Representative Noor. I'm sure you all heard of the last 20 minutes or so when the legislature put all of the appropriations bills that had not previously passed into the omnibus tax bill and literally passed it in the Senate, I think, received it about 20 minutes to midnight. This was one of them, the Human Services Bill. And I would just mention our priorities in there deal with min choices, another issue that clients or that counties are dealing with, as well as, more importantly, the clients have to struggle with. This does allow counties to continue contracting for the assessments. There's language that modifies the timeline in which a county must visit an individual who has requested such an assessment. It was 20 calendar days, it's now 20 working days. And it extends the validity of the Min Choices assessment from 60 to 365 days. Want to mention that the most important thing that we've been working on with the department is the need for reassessments that are done every year. There are simply folks whose situations are not going to change from year to year, and having them sit through a 6, 8, 10-hour process every year has been a burden for them. So we've been talking with the department about shifting that to maybe every other year or every third year for a reassessment, again, with the permission of the client or their guardian. But again, if they request that they want it, we would provide that. But again, if a person's situation hasn't changed, it's really backing up the system in terms of doing those initial Min Choices assessments. The legislature created a task force on guardianship, and it does include a county appointee. They did address jail health in a couple of ways. DHS is required to submit a waiver for an MA demonstration project to provide health care and coordination services to bridge the community-based services for individuals that are in correctional facilities. There's another working group, it's called the Reentry Services Working Group, that is in effect as of July 1st. And they also passed a pilot program to provide payment to counties to support correctional facilities in administering long-acting injectable antipsychotic meds for people that are undergoing mental health treatment. You've all been hearing about the Priority Admissions and Civil Commitment Task Force. They've been meeting for quite some time. Several years ago, Senator Coring, you may have even been there then. The legislature passed the so-called 48-hour rule that says if a person's in a correctional facility and has a mental health issue, they are bumped to the top in terms of getting them into the Anoka Metropolitan Regional Treatment Center. That, of course, has created a backlog for other folks that also needed to get into the system. So the legislature did pass a legislation that required a task force to look at this. Counties were very much involved. Stearns County Commissioner Terrell Clark was involved, and then Blue Earth County Director Angela Youngerberg also spoke on behalf of the directors. Some issues were solved this year, but the biggest issue has not been, and we were talking, Commissioner Barros and I, about capacity is the issue. We need beds in our communities. We need beds at the state-operated level. And, we have no idea what the cost of that would be, but it will be significant. So what did happen is last year, in 2023, we went to the legislature and asked for a reprieve on the county cost share for those folks that have been deemed mentally ill and dangerous, and they're civilly committed as such. There's a court order that says this, and they're sitting in one state-operated facility waiting to get into, as an example, St. Peter, into another state-operated facility. We have no ability to effectuate that transfer. It's all state-operated, and so we did get a 2-year reprieve, which saved counties about $8 million in the first 6 months of this. That ends, however, in June of 2025, so we still have work to do on that. That's in our platform. We're also going to have a more broad item that suggests that it shouldn't be limited to those that have been deemed mentally ill and dangerous. It's for any person that's sitting in one state operated and going to another. There is language that I would mention. The hospitals have a limited exemption to take 10 people out of their hospitals, 10 patients who have been civilly committed and are sitting in their hospital settings. HCMC testified that they had an individual there for 2 years that was not receiving mental health treatment, just awaiting to get transferred. So there is that 10-person transfer that would happen right away. So that's the Human Services bill. Oh, a couple more things. They did eliminate the parental fees for parents whose children receive MA in disability or residential settings. And then also there is language that DHS is to consult with counties to improve case management information systems. So that's the Hoffman-Noor bill. The next item I would mention, I guess it's the next slide, is the Health and Human Services. Again, this is chaired by Senator Wickland, Representative Liebling, and this was another bill that was tucked into the omnibus tax bill in the last moments of session. A couple things I would mention is it requires the commissioner to report to the legislature on alternative healthcare delivery models and a county-administered rural medical assistance model. So another new acronym called CARMA. They set a telecommunications fee at 12 cents per month for each consumer line for the operation and maintenance of the 988 suicide prevention and crisis system. And something that we've been working on for a really long time is children's crisis treatment. DHS, under the language that passed, DHS is to consult with us, counties, as well as tribes, providers, and advocates to develop a covered benefit under MA to provide residential mental crisis stabilization for children. We have it for adults, we don't have it for children. The section is effective, the commissioner needs to report findings to the legislature by October 1st of 2025. I would just mention a little bit on prior authorization. There were some modifications made to the system this year, including the prohibition on PA, prior authorization for outpatient mental health treatment, as well as outpatient SUD treatment. It does not include drugs and medications at this time because the fiscal note did get to be rather large when you included that, and so they've made some progress, but expect to see more on that coming up. There is also language that adds rural mental health service providers outside the 7-county metro area to be eligible recipients of mental health services grants. There is a new health professions workforce advisory council, and the Commissioner of Health is required to publish an RFI to assist the department in conducting a comprehensive evaluation of the current health needs and capacity in Minnesota. Finally, I would mention that child placing agencies need to notify an Indian child's tribe or tribes immediately, no later than 24 hours, after receiving information on a missing child. With that, I want to call out your staff. I work very closely with both Kara Terry and Tammy Luick, very much involved in MICA as well as the statewide organization, and just want to make sure that you're aware of how much we value their input there at every meeting and offering their expertise at every meeting. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Are you going to talk
Mr.
about
Chair-
platform at all later? I'm sorry.
Can do it now.
Okay, go ahead.
Nancy, if I might.
Sure.
Just a couple things. First of all, on EMS. So developing that new department, we talked, and we know that won't be up and running until the first of the year probably. But we have a concern in our regional EMS meetings that they're addressing ambulance services in greater Minnesota, but they're not addressing our first responders. And I'm not talking about, our sheriff's departments and police departments and that. I'm talking about the individuals that give their own time and efforts to provide emergency services before those other services arrive on scene. And we have a issue with the funding for that. Right now it's based on seatbelt violations, which people are complying with, so the revenues are shrinking significantly. But we would like to see in that bill or that approach that we start looking at the entire EMS system out there. And this goes to the funding for our regional coordinator positions, and I think there's 8 of them around the state. Ours happens to be in Stearns County, but we need to find a revenue source that supports them. Otherwise, in 2 years, we're going to be out of money, and then every county for themselves, the consistency of the trainings and will be individualized by counties, which I don't think will bode well for the public out there. So that's number one. And the second one, I just wanted to make a point about the $10 million for the SSIS. It's a drop in the bucket. I know it's a study. They should have been doing this study 30 years ago, and I keep saying that, and I pound that drum every time I get a chance. But just so the board knows, that's going to be probably, before they're done, $150 million. You think about the DVS project a few years ago, and it was $100 million, and they struggled with that. This one will be even more complicated than that one. So 10 million is just a bare start. So that's all I have.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, if I could just respond really quickly, that is one of our items on the 2025 platform. If I can just move through it quickly. A number of us met with the administration, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago, with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's administration on this. We're told that SSIS is also a priority for all of the tribes in the state, and so if we could partner, with them on this, it would be important. Our ask of the agency is to replace the system, which I'm hearing numbers of 80 to 100 million, with half of it coming from the feds, but that the state has to front those dollars and then get reimbursed for it. So that's the number I'm hearing. Included also in that is some planning money for Maxis. The Maxis system as well is, tied to all of this, obviously. But just so you know, that is a platform item that is very important to all counties in the state. We've done a number of presentations in various counties, and showing them the green screen technology again of 30 years ago is interesting. I think that was my first job, so it's very much, and the system crashes all of the time. I mean, I heard at one presentation that the system went down when Commissioner Harpster was there, and it just crashed, and so they weren't even able to show the demonstration. So we're getting it out there for sure.
So I think too, another problem with that is there aren't technicians that understand that platform
Exactly.
that's built under. So to go out and find staff to replace retiring staff and that to put the Band-Aids on there is getting more and more difficult. So
Exactly.
it's really time to invest in that.
Right, and with we're hearing one-time money is what they'll probably be looking at more this year rather than, extending long-term or ongoing funding for things, and so this would fit into that bucket if they're willing to do it. I'm just going to run really through the other priorities. The MnChoices reassessment has fallen on, everybody's looking at that. And then the county cost shares, again, related to the state-operated services, as well as what comes out of that priorities admissions task force. And finally, also child protection. We're going to need resources to be able to comply with the new African American Family Preservation Act, and so those are the things that we've been talking about. In terms of public health, I would just mention that disease prevention and control, of course, is something that public health addresses. It's almost 100% county levy, and so that's something that they would like to see, some investment in as well. And those are the ones that have risen to the top, but again, we are working on, one other thing with public health. I think you all know that there was a reduction to the cannabis education grant, and that goes directly to local health departments, and it saved the state $7.3 million. So that will be also on the list of priorities for public health to try and get those dollars back.
As a board, and, the times I've attended these meetings for MICA and AMC, and I listen to the staff, and I don't know how you juggle all this stuff. I mean, it's shocking. And then to try to, during session, to get to all those meetings and that take place, you guys do an outstanding job. And, we'll miss Steve. I think that's well-known in in the Capitol Arena down there. So I just thank you for what you do. It's just shocking to me that you even want to do this job. But
Thank you.
But you do a great job, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Barrows. And I'm going to touch on a couple of other things. There is a lot to juggle, and I think sort of to that point, I think particularly when it comes to MICA, the next three areas are areas where we definitely do advocacy on your behalf, but we also do it in we don't attempt to cover every dimension of environment, general government, corrections, public safety, but we do focus on areas where the large counties in our membership really tell us these are critical issues. And we hear a lot about your challenges with managing solid waste and the conversations that have been going on at the Capitol, particularly around waste to energy and how that factors into the 100% clean energy standard by 2040. And so, first of all, in 2024, the big piece, there was a number of pieces that passed, but the big thing that passed was the Packaging Waste Reduction Act legislation. That packaging waste is about 40% of the waste stream. And so over time, with this new law, manufacturers of packaging waste will be required to participate in a producer responsibility organization that will also provide some revenues for you all and others who are basically providers, administrators of solid waste for that work to both help divert more of it to reuse and recycling. But those continue to be issues, so we are getting feedback from counties that we expect to really take and have an important conversation with the legislature about solid waste and about either carving that out or having some approach that continues to provide that support, as well as newer technologies like anaerobic digestion and carbon sequestration and other things that some of our member counties are looking at. Wood waste is a growing issue for everybody sort of that is in the EAB area of the state, and in ensuring there's opportunities for that. Happy to take any questions there. General government, there has been a lot of legislation lately that impacts you all as well as public and private employers, but certainly impacts you all as employers, as well as administrators, certainly in terms of the earned sick and safe time, the paid family medical leave, para changes. Last legislative session, there was an enhancement to the annuity multiplier for para correctional employees, but there was no state funding that came along with that. So on average, well, not on average total, it'll be about $4 to $5 million of additional costs that will fall on county, mostly on county governments annually with the increased contribution levels. And I know you'll see that here in Crow Wing County. But looking forward to 2025, pensions issues continue to be, and expanding pension benefits continues to be a conversation at the Capitol that we are following closely and working with partners. A key for principle that is guiding our conversations with legislators are just maintaining the financial stability of those pension funds. If these are state policy changes, to make sure the state is stepping up to help resource those funding changes and or recognize through county aid formulas or that sort of thing how they are impacting and driving level. And then also, you know, as we have conversations about whether or not different classes of employees have a need for different pension level benefits, how does that impact sort of the employee contingent as a whole? And then the final one is corrections and public safety, and just to say that some things happened, not a ton happened the last legislative session in that area, but we fully anticipate the importance of revisiting Community Corrections Act funding and funding for probation services this legislative session. There was a huge increase, $43 million, a much needed increase, I should say, because the state has never kept up with its cost share funding for probation services as a critical component of Minnesota's continuum of criminal justice. Commissioner Schnell attended MICA's Board of Directors meeting earlier, I guess it was last week on Wednesday, and had a good conversation with board members about the upcoming session. But we think that there's between $12 and $15 million annually that's needed to ensure full funding for the probation services system going forward, and so that'll be a key priority. And then just finally on the slide, this is sort of my history with the legislature is being a budget guy, so I follow the numbers closely. I know an October update came out on October 10th. I'm not fully versed on that yet, but generally the picture is still this, and we'll get the November forecast. I think it's November 7th or so that the forecast is going to come out, but in general, there's more one-time resources on the front end, but we are anticipating a session where the opportunity or the flexibility, I should say, in the state budget for ongoing adjustments to the budget, whether that be increased spending or reduced revenues, will be limited in terms of I think that we'll be in a little bit of a positive situation going forward. But it will still be leaner than it was 2 years ago, for sure.
So just a question on corrections. Is there any talk about, let's say have somebody that goes in the Crow Wing County Jail and they're on medical MA, and once they go into jail, then it's my understanding that they're not on MA anymore, and then it becomes their health care becomes our responsibility. Is there any talk about changing that so that, I don't understand why that would be such a big deal, you know?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Coring, there is talk about that. It does dovetail, of course, with the feds, but part of the waiver that the department is going to be applying for would allow for, I think it's 30 days of medication or to get a person on MA before they leave our jails or the state correctional system.
Okay.
It's either 30 or 90 days where they would be stabilized as they're, leaving. But that requires CMS to sign off on.
Okay. And then back to the budget surplus. Tell me what's it forecasted in October?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I don't have I haven't looked at the October numbers yet. I must admit. I know they're out there because they come out on the 10th. So what is on that page is the July economic update.
Okay.
And what was happening at that time was the GDP projections were pretty steady compared to February. But the state has been collecting still more above forecasted revenues for February.
So I guess I can't remember from my time in the legislature, does the legislature go by the November numbers for the 25 budget, or is there another forecast? I think it's in February, isn't there?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, your memory is good, quite solid. Yes, they start in November. That's what the governor will put his or her budget recommendations together in January based on the November forecast. But then a February forecast will come out. There will oftentimes be adjustments to the governor's recommendations, and that's really when things kick in at the legislature once the February forecast comes out, typically at the end of February.
Thank you.
And then I'm done with the slides. Thank you again, commissioners, for your comments. I would just say that the final slide is a little outdated. We welcomed Amber Bacchus as the principal, the lead for us on transportation representation at the Capitol from United Strategies. We will get a formal communication out to all member counties with staffing changes. We'll probably do that after the election because we know some county commissioners are also up for election, and that will give us an opportunity to communicate not only to our board of directors but to all of you as to who we are and who our new staff resources are as we look forward to the 2025 session.
I'm up for reelection, so.
He has nobody running against him, though.
Any other questions?
We can send your letter now.
Any other questions from the board at all for these people? Do you have anything? I'm just thinking maybe county administrator had something to
Mr.
add.
Chair, I don't have anything further other than to thank Matt and his team for the work that they do. We are very fortunate to have the opportunity to be a participant in MICA because it helps us with kind of working with some of our counterparts that we know we're about the same
Yep.
issues that we're facing, we're about the same size. Having that interaction with that group of counties is very helpful, and the staff and the work that they do is very much appreciated.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
One final thing. I wonder if it would be helpful if we boiled down some issues that I think that affect Crow Wing County specifically and ask our legislators before the legislative session to come in here and talk to them. I think that would be a good exercise.
Mr. Chair, I would concur. I think any lobbying that we can do prior to the session bodes well for us, so helping them understand our issues
Yes.
and the impact to the county taxpayer, I think is important.
Mr. Chair, Board, if you would like, we would make sure we schedule something in early January with the legislators to make sure that we are all on the same page.
Sounds good.
Yeah, if I recall, there was some talk, there's some counties out there that kind of have actually, I mean, they do it Zoom or whatever, and they put it either on some meeting they have in the administration room where they just have that person in there and they just talk back and forth maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. I can't remember exactly what county was doing it, but a couple of them are doing that on a regular basis. If we could install something like that, that would be kind of, I think, helpful for all of us.
Would you like it to be at a committee of the whole meeting? Would you like it to be a separate legislature, county board work session?
I think it should be a separate work session with the legislators and the county board specifically for that.
We can do that.
I think.
Yeah,
I don't know, I just think it's important that we tell them the issues that are having, I can tell you, I went in reverse. I wasn't a county commissioner first when I went to the legislature, and I almost think it should be a prerequisite that you be a county commissioner, and then you go to the legislature because you realize the effects that everything that you do has a trickle-down effect of the county board. And I don't think a lot of legislators realize that, and probably some don't really care, but anyway.
Would you like to try for January 14th, since you don't have a meeting that day? You'll have to meet on the 7th for statutory requirements.
I don't know that they'd be able to be here, they'd be in session, but you're thinking kind of a Microsoft Teams meeting, is that
It's
what you-
possible we could do a virtual meeting, or if we can get them before
Session is February, though,
session
isn't it?
starts in
February.
Mr. Chair, the session this coming year starts January 14th, so that is the
it does
first day
start.
of legislative
That'll be
session.
busy.
So
Well, that
you-
won't work.
Yeah, so
you
that
wanna
one
avoid
probably
that
won't
day.
work,
Well,
but we
well,
will
could we,
coordinate with
let's
their
ask them to be
schedules.
here anyway. That's
Yeah.
that important.
Well, either be here physically or be here through our electronic media or something like that, at least so we got a one-on-one.
And I think it would be important for us to try to catch them before session begins. If you've been, as Commissioner Coring knows, the legislature gets fast and furious. They are full of committee meetings and all the things that impact them. I think it's important for us to make sure that they hear the message from you before session starts. So we'll work for something late December, early January.
I will be here in person on the 7th for our reorganizational meeting. Would that be,
Like the afternoon or after the board meeting? Is that what you're looking at?
I guess?
We'll see,
I can try.
because we got to also
Come up
fit it into their schedule
Yeah.
too.
If you recall, we have 5 legislators, so trying to work to get as many of them in person as we could, perhaps we could get them virtually.
And then if
for
we
those
had a little, kind of some talking points that we had out ahead of time, I think would make their time more valuable. I know going down to the legislature for us is also a little bit of work, but I know when we get down there and actually go into their office and sit there, then they see us one-on-one, and I think that does make a difference. I found that in previous roles, that has made a difference, so. Not always easy to do, though.
But I still think that we should have a recorded meeting with the media here so that the Crow Wing County residents know the issues that we're talking about with our
Yep,
legislators.
I agree, I totally agree with you.
So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Thank you all.
time.
Let us know if we can be helpful.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome in Crow Wing County anytime.
Thank you.
We bring your friends with you.
We're stopping for coffee and baked goods.
Sure.
After this.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Next, we have Chris Pence coming up to go through our land use packet. Big packet today.
Good morning. I do have 4 items to just want to discuss with you this morning and go through a few items. The first item we have is just some changes to the land use ordinance. I think that'll be helpful up there on the screen. You see Therese put up there is kind of a summary of the changes. The main changes, again, are going to be adding a new Article 15 for commercial cannabis, but this was also an opportunity that Gary and I thought might make sense to make a few other changes to the ordinance that we think will be important for heading into 2025. So if you look at Article 7, that is our current ordinance section talking about conditional use permits. We're allowed by statute by 394 to add interim use permits as well. They are the same as a conditional use permit. They're processed the same. The only difference between a conditional and an interim is that there's an opportunity to put a sunset date or an ownership change date on such a permit so that if a certain time comes where a permit's valid for 5 years, they'd have to come back and renew that permit or if ownership changes. That's the real big difference for interim use permits. We'd want those to be primarily for like gravel pits and for things like the cannabis uses would be interim uses, so that if an ownership changes, we want the folks to come in and to reapply if they want to continue that use on that property. So that's what Article 7 is about.
And we didn't have that before in our ordinances at all?
We have not had interim use before. No, this will be the first time that's been introduced into the land use ordinance.
I think it'll be a nice tool.
It's just another tool in the tool belt, I think, to manage certain types of uses that are important, but have a little bit different potential restrictions on them compared to the standard conditional use permit.
Chris, a question on that. So, I had a little controversy with a gravel pit down in my area. So they come in there, it's approved, they come in there, they process the material, get the rocks to make asphalt.
Right.
It leaves a tremendous amount of, it's not really waste, it's good fill dirt. It's a big, like 180,000 yards of sand. So when the permit timeline ends, does that mean that nobody can haul out of there? Or are you just talking about when they're making gravel or making?
Right, so it
Class
depends on what type of gravel pit they're approved for. So we have a G1 through a G5. A G1 gravel pit is basically a borrow pit on your own property for your own personal use. A G2 is the extractive use where you just pull material out. You get into a G3, you start doing more of the crushing activities, and then G4, G5 get more into the cement and then the hot mix plant for making for ready mix type things. So it depends on the use, and just because a interim use permit is required doesn't mean there has to be a timing requirement to it. It just provides that option for the planning commission to apply that if they think it's important.
But let's say hypothetically, this gravel pit, let's say in 5 years it ends, the timeline ended.
Yep.
And there's still 150,000 yards of this sand.
Right.
Which actually makes great fill dirt again. Does that mean once the permit is ended, that nobody can haul that stuff that's piled up in there?
Correct.
Out?
They would have to come back in and renew their permit. If after that 5-year window, there wasn't there was still more work to be done in that pit, they would come back in and renew that permit for longer than that.
Also, isn't there something, if you're done with a pit, as far as reclaiming it or putting it back to?
Correct.
I've seen that done,
Yep,
where
and we
we're done,
all-
we're done taking out what we need to take out of here, and then they come by and push all the overburden back and just kind of plant seed in
Correct.
there.
Correct. All gravel pit, when they get a conditions permit, now reclamation is a requirement as part of the plan. So when they're done with the extractive use, then, like you said, we want to get it, so we don't want a big mound, we want to kind of grade it back down and get vegetation growing on the site again.
That brings up another point. I know that they have to buy a bond, and I think it's only like a 5,000.
That's what the ordinance says right now, correct?
Oh, that doesn't seem, not that I want to advocate a whole lot more, but boy, I don't know how, if that was $5,000, I don't know how you're ever going to reclaim that for $5,000.
Well, and Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Corring, I agree with that. That's an area I was actually looking at just a couple weeks ago, and that's been in the ordinance since I can remember.
Right.
And so it just is a requirement to be, we might want to look at it being more of a percent. I think you can get some percentage of the overall, what would estimated cost of what would take to reclaim the site. That would be what we'd be looking for a bond amount versus just, because I remember back when I started back in '08, and we did some of these road projects for these new plats, and we had a flat bond rate for $5,000 for roads back then too, and you can't even hardly mobilize equipment for $5,000, much less build a road. And so, we changed that to reflect what would be the cost of actually building the road.
And I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that seems kind of low. But I don't know, I just don't want us to run after a problem that we don't have, because
Right.
I'm not aware of anywhere where we've had an issue like that where we have to worry about that.
Yeah.
So far.
My only response would be it's never a problem until it's a
Until it
problem.
is a problem.
And then if we're in a spot where we didn't prepare for that, then we might be in a spot where we can't do what we need to do to
I mean,
get that taken
in
care of.
have you ever had a case where you've had to, trigger the bond to get something done in
Nope.
any gravel pits?
Not that I can remember. Not that I can remember. There's a modest change in Article 9, just housekeeping. We just needed to update the verbiage about our septic site suitability requirement report for winter windows, just more housekeeping on that. And then if you go to Article 10, I don't know if maybe we can scroll down to that page, Therese, that's on page 57 of the packet. Might be easier just to maybe see it. So if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see that we are deleting the R20. This is response to the comprehensive plan update that we're getting. R20 is no longer a land use district. And if you scroll a little bit further, you'll see that also we're combining our commercial 1 and commercial 2 into one commercial, our industrial heavy, industrial light into one industrial. So we're consolidating those two together.
Before you go on, Chris, I
Yes.
have a question on that. Because you talk about being adjacent to municipalities, and So are we proposing to allow, for instance, a metal crushing business right next door to a residential area? If that one side is commercial and the other side is residential?
There's potential. I mean, there's potential for, I mean, I always get that question, you know, what happens when we have commercial up against residential? At some point, it does reach that point of where commercial ends and residential does start. But we have certain controls in the ordinance that say if somebody wanted to operate like you said, like a junk salvage yard or a metal crushing, that's a conditional use permit in more in the ag forested areas. And so that's not something that we really want, you know, in residential areas. So we do have some controls as to where we want to put those sorts of activities, so.
So my concern is, though, the C1 and C2, or the light and heavy, allowed for kind of a, excuse me, well, it's not really a live person, so I don't have to say excuse me to it, but, allowed for kind of a gradual approach. So if your heavy is further out and residential builds up around it, that's residential's problem then. They understand that it already exists and
Right.
we're not going to move it out of there. With this, it appears that that won't happen in that manner.
So when I did the review of looking at the differences between the C1, C2, and the commercial light versus heavy, the differences were nominal. They're really, when you lined them all up and you see what was different in the different tables, it wasn't much different. I mean, so by changing this and consolidating from a commercial to 2 down to 1 and industrial to 1, the changes wouldn't have really any negative impacts because they're really very similar to be the same when we had made some of those changes. So I don't see those sorts of impacts happening.
Okay.
If we scroll down a little bit further, you can see just deleting those out so that we get that cleaned up. And then we added, if you'll go a little further, this is where you'll see across the top where you'll see the commercial being consolidated, and then commercial, the light and the heavy industrial being consolidated. When you looked across the side, there really wasn't much of a difference between what was allowed in light industrial versus heavy industrial. So there really wasn't a big difference between the two. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't go back at a future revision and look at these uses and make sure that where we want these types of activities are where they're happening. But I will say that most of our industrial property is pretty minimal in the county. There's not much of it. The majority of it is around Klaus Stamping up north of Merrifield. So we don't have a lot of industrial property in the county for the most part. We really want the industrial, we want them in the Brainerd Industrial Park. That's where we would prefer to have that. We have an industrial zoning for reasons like Klaus Stamping that was here, you know, prior to there being zoning in place.
Or the Baxter Industrial Park.
Baxter Industrial Park, any municipal.
Both of them.
Any
Fill them
municipal
both up.
industrial park is great because they've got they're better suited for, with the infrastructure to be able to handle some of those heavier uses than some of the rural parts of the county, so. But we do have some, but there just really isn't a lot of industrial around the county for zoning.
Okay.
If we scroll down a little bit further, we'll stop right here quick. One change that we're proposing would be that right now, if you have a single-family dwelling, is allowed 1 per parcel. So that would mean, let's say you owned a 40-acre parcel and it was owned R10, you'd be able to build 1 house on 40 acres. And what we're proposing is if we delete this 1 per parcel thing, you should be able to build 1 per the density allowed on your lot. So if you have 40 acres, you should be able to build 4 houses on that lot without having to go, with this, you'd be required to subdivide it into parcels before you could actually put a dwelling on there. And I don't think that's necessary. I think that if people have the density to be able to put, you know, dwellings on their property, they can do that, knowing that in the future, if they decide to subdivide, you know, making sure that they put the houses, you know, where they want to have them built. So that's one thing that we have situations across the county where we've got some of these larger parcels where they're family owned and there's no interest in creating lots because the family doesn't want to create lots because that'll just incentivize somebody to sell off that family lot that's been in the family for, you know, for decades and decades and decades. And so we just want to clarify that if you have the density allowed in your property, you can get a permit. It doesn't mean that you have to automatically subdivide your property to be able to build more than 1 house on a parcel.
So would that mean like a simple land divide then you'd do because you'd want, that parcel wouldn't be listed, it would still be listed on that 1 parcel ID?
Yep.
Two homes on 1
Correct.
parcel ID?
Correct. Yep.
But somewhere down the road, when somebody left, then that's when it would come in where you'd separate it.
Correct. Yep, at some point when they were ready to possibly sell the property or that. But there's just a lot of family-owned properties where people own these larger lots and they want to have these, different units, different dwellings on there. And right now, this only allows you to have one dwelling unit per property, per parcel. And it wasn't always like that. So this was changed in the timeframe that when I was left to work for the state. This got changed and updated. So Gary and I have talked about it, and we think it's our recommendation that we go back to allowing folks to have that one parcel, not based on dwelling per parcel, but one based on your zoning that would be allowed on the property as far as the density.
So an example for my property, I have 40 acres. I could put 10 homes on that property.
Depending on how it's zoned, correct?
It's actually zoned, it's zoned through the city. It's in a city.
So let's say it's zoned R10, so a
Yeah.
10-acre minimum, then there would be a maximum of 4 houses on that.
Without doing any more than just getting a permit and building the
Permits,
house and
correct.
putting the septic and the.
Correct. Setbacks and all that, correct?
Where does our guest cabin kick in on this? I thought that we allowed somebody.
We do, and so you
Shoreline?
would be, no, that's so for, if you're within the shoreline district, you're allowed a 700 square foot guest cabin, and if you're in the non-shoreline area, I don't have my ordinance in front of me, but I think it's a 900 square foot, so you could have that's one, we have that set up as the guest cottages, guest quarters are one per property, so that would be the limiting factor on that, so you wouldn't be able to.
So is this similar to that? I mean, is this?
So it just limits people to the size is all. So if you had, say, 40 acres, the way the ordinance reads right now is you could have one house and one smaller guest house on 40 acres. But if they wanted to, we have situations where, I'd like to build my son a house over here and my daughter wants a house over here and our house is over here. With the way the current ordinance is right now, they would have to either get that platted or go through a subdivision process to be able to build those on there.
Where I could bring in some houses that were gonna be demoed and brought them into my property and made them houses, and then I could rent them off.
Yeah,
And I wouldn't have to go through any more than just bringing them all in and doing that.
permit,
And
to get a permit you have to get a permit for it, correct? Yep. Otherwise, right now, that would then just mean if we wanted to, on those larger tracts, they would just have to subdivide their property, be able to do, to be able to build more.
when would you
dwellings
get
or
to
cabins on our
that,
property.
when would you get to that point where you'd look at having it platted and subdivided and going through that process?
I would say when they felt it was the time for their family to decide that they want to start selling off some of those lots or making sure who owns what property. But we just have situations throughout the county where the family owns a large chunk and they don't want to plat it off to be able to build more cabins. And as their families are getting older now the son is now married and wants to have his cabin up here and he wants to so it's more of like a family, like a family compound situation with multiple
In the district
cabins.
I'm at, there's a place called Lincoln Point, and which was, settled how many years ago, and it was kind of one parcel, and everybody had their little pieces of it. I've seen that look like that's become more and more of a challenge, because it sounded really good 100 years ago. It sure is not so good now.
Yeah, I guess the question is, from a regulatory approach, is this something that would we prefer to keep it at one per parcel? If you want to have multiple dwellings, you have to plat off lots to make it, to get more permits from the county or not? I think that's the policy question.
Just another question. So let's say I have some property and I'm going to build a house, but let's say my parents or my in-laws are getting older, and when I build the house, I'm going to have an in-laws quarter, the door separation, they have a kitchen, they have a bedroom and everything. How do we look at that? We don't look at that like a duplex or anything.
As long as it is attached to the existing dwelling that's there, we only worry about number of bedrooms to make sure the septic system has the right capacity for wastewater treatment. But other than that, no concerns with that at all.
Is that it?
For this one, there's just,
I have to think about that one for a
Okay.
little
Yeah,
while.
there's some, yeah.
okay. That sounds good. This will, as a reminder, this is going out for public comment starting today. It'll be out for 30-day public comment. The plan will be that we come back to the November Committee of the Whole, give you an update on what we heard, get some feedback. Depending on the number of comments and all that, our goal is to get to the Planning Commission for a public hearing in November, and then come back for final review by the county board at the December meeting, so that this is ready to go by the first of the year, especially focus on the cannabis side of it.
So Chris, another question before you move on. Commissioner Barrows and I talked to me about this commercial thing. Can you tell me what the impetus was behind that, changing that,
From commercial 1 and commercial 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, when you looked at the ordinance and we lined up what was the difference between commercial 1 and commercial 2, I found one difference and so it really seemed like there was really a duplication of having two commercials zoning in the county that really weren't making a big difference as far as what uses would be allowed in certain areas. And the same with the light industrial and the heavy industrial. There just wasn't a big difference where it says, wow, you could see that, because the commercial 1 is meant to be adjacent to municipalities. Commercial 2 is meant to be more of the rural commercial, but there weren't any differences in the uses and how they were laid out. So we're just trying to simplify the code and go down to one commercial and one industrial zoning instead of having 4, 2 instead of 4. Sure. That was something that was identified in the comprehensive plan as needing something that the county should consider updating in its ordinance.
Okay.
A couple other changes in Article 10. One right now is that making sure that cannabis uses are interim uses. We've got that in the ordinance. And then, so we know the districts, we talked about that last time, being in the commercial parts of the county as far as the cannabis uses. And then we had something right now in Article 10 talking about liquor on or off sale in the Shoreland District being a conditional use permit. To be able to do liquor on or off sale, that really needs to be commercially zoned to be able to get your liquor license for that. So that we're just going to say, if you want to have a liquor on or off sale, it has to be located in commercial zoning.
What brought that on?
To get because you get for there to be a liquor license that gets issued by the county, that's commercial zoning is required for that. Mm-hmm. And our zoning ordinance says it's a conditional use permit in the Shoreland District. So what we're trying to do is just line those up so that they are equal. I don't think we want somebody to come in that lives just on the shoreline to have a liquor license at their house with a conditional use permit versus being in a commercial property where it'd be in the right location for somebody to have a liquor license. That's the reason.
So if somebody wanted to, then they'd have to come in and have a land use map amendment. They'd change
to be commercial to be able to get a liquor license.
So this doesn't affect any current.
Nope.
Okay. All right.
Doesn't affect anybody. It's just for the future.
Okay.
And then if we jump, one item we did also add as a use within the is to add a marina. We don't have that current in our land use. We have it in our definition section of what a marina is. We just don't have it laid out in the land use tables where it's allowed in a conditional use permit. So we added that to the land use tables as well to clarify where a marina can be located. If we jump to page 69. This is a provision that's allowed through the state with their model Shoreland ordinance. It's called we're going to refer to as setback averaging, but it's called the string line test, where if you've got two cabins on each side of you, instead of going through the full variance process, we can take the average of what those setbacks would be, and we can issue a permit for that and not run them through the full-blown variance process to go through that. So it'll simplify, I think, the permitting process on some of those variances where it's pretty obvious based on the neighborhood what should be allowed out there as far as permitting. We did include the provision that says that if you are going to use this, that you do have to do a stormwater management plan and then look at the vegetation on your shoreline as well to make sure we have those, because those are two of the main conditions that the Board of Adjustment puts into play when they do approve a variance. So it just meant to make things easier for citizens to come in and get permits as long as they're equal with what their neighbors are doing, they don't have to go through the full-blown variance process.
So let's say you had a cabin that was built 100 years ago, real close to the lake, that our ordinance wouldn't allow today, and then 2 lots away you had another cabin that was done the same way. are you saying the string line test would mean that that person who wants to develop that property in the middle can put his cabin within the,
It needs to be adjacent, it needs to be your direct neighbors, it can't be 2 or 3 neighbors down, it's gotta
okay,
be
so
your
the
direct
third,
neighbors.
the lot number 2 in the middle of 1 and 3.
Yep, direct neighbors, and it cannot be in shore impact zone 1, so you at least have to be more than half the setback out. So on a, say for a lake like Bay Lake, where it's a 100-foot setback, you couldn't be any closer than 50 feet. So if everybody else was 20 feet away from the lake,
You
then just
can't-
have
you
to
can't
go-
put
then
yours
then
20
you just
feet.
have to come back and go through the variance process for it. That's not something that could be a permit issued without going to the Board of Adjustment for that, so, yeah.
Okay, just
Yeah, we,
because,
you just have those situations where we issue a variance for somebody to be 63 feet away from the lake when 75 is required, and both neighbors are the exact same, and, it would simplify the process on some of those, and, we're seeing, last month we had, I think it was 18 items before the Board of Adjustment, and this month we've got 12. So just trying to see are can we remove a couple of those applications off the agenda that would fall into this category of doing that, the averaging test for the neighbors, so.
I think Baxter does a similar thing.
I was actually, as I've been looking around, a lot of counties do this, so. And it's something that the DNR has in their model ordinance that's, that they allow as sequencing flexibility, or not, or for zoning flexibility, so, it's not something it's something that the DNR will support as well. If we jump into Article 14, we don't need to go to the page, but we're just deleting residential 20 out of that just for clarification. If we jump to Article 15, which is on page 88. Yeah, I thought that might be helpful. So this is the actual cannabis ordinance itself, everything we've talked about. It's now put into its own article, and I think it's ready to go. It's everything as we've discussed. There's been no changes made since the last time we talked. It was more of a draft form. Now it's been put into indexed into the actual land use ordinance itself. So unless there's any questions about that, I don't know if there's too much discussion we have to have about that. And then the last was just adding some definitions. They start on page 188. Oh, maybe I had the wrong page number. I'm sorry about that. Maybe I was doing so well to that point. So the definitions that we're going to add are going to be basically cannabis related, the interim use permit. So most of these definitions that you see here are all on that summary. Let's go back to that. That's fine. When you go back to that summary, they're all cannabis related except for the interim use permit. And then at the very end, I did add something to the ordinance after we sent it over for Trees to put into your packet. We've been having some confusion over if a patio is considered to be a structure or not. And so we're just proposed to update the structure definition to include patio in that to make it clear that they are expected to meet all the requirements of a structure as anything else. So, any questions about the land use ordinance itself?
So a question, so Gary, this is for you too. As you know, I'm kind of a less government kind of guy, always have been and always will be. I don't want, us just making up a whole bunch of ordinances and putting the squeeze on my constituents any more than we have to. I understand we have to have rules and regulations. I've seen what happens when we don't with some of these cleanups that we've been doing. So my question to you is, with all these changes, what's your interpretation? Do you think that this is more of a kind of a cleanup and, or is it just adding a lot more pressure on people? I don't know if I asked that the right way. Do you feel like this is adding a hell of a lot more restrictions on people, or is it just more of a cleanup and maybe some changes that need to happen?
Sure. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, most of this is cleanup.
Okay.
If you think of that interim use permit, that's just another tool.
Yeah.
The definitions definitely needed some clarity when you get into discussions with property owners. I want to do something, and then they like to say, well, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. We're just trying to get some clarity for our customers. And the cannabis is what it is. We needed to, I believe you guys needed to probably do some kind of regulation, otherwise there, could be the Wild West. And I think it's a really good opportunity, since we had to do the cannabis, just to clean up and add a few more tools in the toolbox without really a lot more regulation to folks, to streamline or the setback averaging, to maybe shave, we're estimating maybe 7-8 variances a year, to not have somebody do the $500 and the whole process through that, where staff can go out and do a setback average, I think is helpful to our customers. So yeah, I think it's a.
That makes it a little bit more common sense and a lot kind of more easier on somebody in that situation.
Correct,
So,
correct.
All right, Chris, what do you think it's?
I totally agree. I don't think our goal is to make things any more challenging for folks to develop their property. I think it's, but I do think having interim use permits is another tool in the tool belt that we could be able to effectively use. I think if you go back again to that one per parcel, I think that's not making somebody go through a big, huge process to subdivide their property, and just so they could simply build a cabin on their property, maybe for their mother-in-law to live in, or for, maybe for their kids to stay in or something like that, trying to reduce that burden of having to subdivide the property when you're ready to subdivide the property. But in my mind, I think this reduces some of the regulatory burden on folks, to be honest.
Yeah, if I
And
could.
the reason why I bring that up is because, for example, I live on Lower South Long Lake, and I'm on the Lower South Long Facebook page. I think there's 12 or 1,500 people on there. Somebody had it looked like about an 8 by 10 or 12 foot little building, and it looked like it was kind of close down by the water, and said, this person is saying, hey, anybody that wants this, I have to get it out of there. The county is requiring that I get it out of here because we have too much impervious surface. Well, then if you read the comments, they kind of beat up on us, the county, and somebody says, well, doesn't the county have anything better to do? And I just thought, I'm not going to wade into that whole thing, but I just want to make sure that people that are here don't think that we're just have our thumb on their head all the time. Just like the conversation I had at Gary's office, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency always seems to have their thumb on us as it relates to the landfill, and drags their feet. We want to get our permit or whatever it is. I find that they're very difficult to work with. And so we know how that is. I just don't want that to happen to the people that we all represent here. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Well, and I think you get to the point of where, everything you read on Facebook is always right,
Yeah.
And so, for those folks who are out on Facebook who are questioning some of these things, they can call the office at 218-824-1010, and I'd be happy to chat with them about any specific question they have. Facebook has a way of putting some things out there that just frankly aren't true.
Right.
And so if you want the truth, come talk to the county and we'll tell you what the truth is.
But I think we've cultivated over the last many, many years a good relationship with the citizens of Crow Wing County, where they come in and it's such a streamlined thing, and there's a lot of positive comments. I just don't want us to start heading. I mean, it just depends on who is on the county board. It depends on staff too, recommendations, and you get the wrong person in there, and they have a different frame of mind, and they could get us down a road where they just restrict everything that anybody wants to do, and that's just something that concerns me. So it was just a comment. Thank you.
Next item.
Next item.
All right. So what you have before you on item number 2 is basically an ordinance rewrite of the solid waste ordinance. This was something that is a requirement that came out of our recent approval by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for our solid waste management plan. The current plan right now we have was drafted originally back in 1994. It hasn't been updated since. And so we've been working with our consultant Burns McDonald to help with this update. And so I think, Heather, are you online? she make it? Is anybody online? Is there anybody online right now? Well, I'm wondering, hoping that's Heather. Heather Crowell was the with Burns McDonald on the update to the ordinance, and the goal was for her to be here today, but I don't see. I think so. But maybe she
And I
can't.
did have to mute that participant because their phone was ringing in the background.
Okay.
So if they are trying to speak, you need to unmute yourself.
And if not, we can just go through it on our own, so that's fine.
All right.
So there should be a memorandum in your packet that looks like this. I didn't get a
Page
page.
number?
I was really good on the other one. Started out so strong with page numbers.
It's right there.
Correct, right. And so, basically, we'll just start kind of walk through it article by article, and feel free to ask any questions if need be. So there's really no changes in Article 1 compared to the old ordinance. We just have to have the authority and the intent, and repeal the old ordinance as a requirement. Article 2 is definitions. We did need to update some definitions that were in there based on the old ordinance. If you jump into Article 3, this is our general provisions section. The difference here is just clarifying that there needs to be planning and zoning approval for certain solid waste activities. So if somebody wants to operate let's say a transfer station on their property, or that, they have to make sure they come and get planning and zoning approval from the county before they do that. Making sure that there's things like indemnification, financial assurance, data privacy, just general provisions of the ordinance. That's what's in Article 3. Article 4 gets into solid waste storage, collection, and disposal. This one, I think, is really, a big improvement over what was in the old ordinance, because if you look at what we have now, we have a nuisance section here that's much stronger than the previous ordinance. The previous ordinance basically said you could accumulate up to 1% of junk on your property. So if you had let's say a 40-acre lot, you could take, 4 acres of junk could be accumulated on a property, was what the old ordinance had. And what the new ordinance basically says is that you can't have junk on your property. You can't accumulate things like furniture and white goods and just the junk cars, those sorts of things. The new ordinance gives us a much clearer and transparent way of what we expect for property to look like in Crow Wing County as far as from a nuisance standpoint. And I think it'll really assist us in being able to work with people to get these cleanups on these property done, so that we can kind of, get those, especially in the rural areas of the county, they look a little rough, so.
And actually, I think, at least for my constituents, I can say that I think this is going to be a good thing. I was kind of hoping that we'd get something like this in place, because I still have a lot of, down in Roosevelt Township, there's a lot of places that a lot of junk is piled up, and I think this is going to be a tool to clean those places up. And then I remember, God rest his soul, Commissioner Dewey Towges was always property rights. And I feel like I'm the same way, but I think I've evolved to the point where it isn't just the property rights of the person that's right here on this lot, it's the property rights on the person that's on either side or close by. They have property rights too. If you got a big, huge mess there, I don't think that's fair to their property rights either, and the valuation of their property when you got a junkyard right next to them. So I think this is going to be a good thing, a good tool for the county to, when people call and say, hey, there's a disaster next door, we've got the tools to kind of clean that up.
And I'd agree. And I think at the end of the day, we just want to be fair and consistent. We want to treat everybody the same, and to, just get some of these, it doesn't mean that, people can have stuff. I mean, it's not that we're going to say they can't have stuff, but just needs to be, stuff that's not causing an imposition or being a detriment to the neighbors or to the neighborhood in general.
And we're not going to be running around and looking, once this goes in, we're going to be combing the properties. When it's
Nothing-
complaint driven and it comes to
changed.
us and it meets this
Yep. complaint-driven, absolutely.
Complaint-driven,
Yep.
yes.
Yep, we
That's
don't-
the only thing I look at.
We don't
sometimes.
have to go looking for problems, they come find us. So,
I think there's enough out
There's
there.
enough out there just on a complaint basis that we have that we can follow up on and get resolved, so. Article 5, if we jump into that, it's just giving more details as far as equipment requirements for maintenance, labeling, storage, and inspection, record keeping that we need to do. And then it also gives us an opportunity for an introduction of suspension and revocation language. So if we have haulers that are not following the solid waste ordinance and following, the requirements that we have, there's a process for a suspension or a revocation of a license where they can't haul within the county.
What have you had in the past for like haulers that would haul from, just throw it in, didn't matter if it came from Crow Wing or another county and try to get it into the transfer station? Did you have anything in there to keep that?
Pretty weak. There wasn't a lot of teeth in there to be able to really have what would be the steps to go through to
It's
some
just
sort of
on your-
suspension or revocation.
On your honor that you were gonna do it?
Right. So that's some things we'll be talking about at the like solid waste committee coming up would be when the haulers come in and they have to come in and sign the scale sheet basically to have language on it that says that this waste came from Crow Wing County. It's not from out of county waste. We're having some of those changes so that if they are doing some of that at least we'll be able to go back to say that they had told us that they're bringing in basically county waste is what we're looking for. It's a landfill dedicated to the use of the citizens of Crow Wing County, and so we want to make sure it's being used properly.
And these are all just going out for public hearing now? Is this the same type of process?
This has gone out for public comment. The public comment ended last Friday.
Yep.
And we received one comment on this ordinance, basically saying that we had a citizen who wanted to organize collection,
Yep.
where the county would be in charge of basically zoning the county into areas and then giving contracts to certain haulers in certain areas, so. And that's, from a staff standpoint, it's not something that's, that we would recommend. We think that the way that it works privately works well right now. And so that was the only comment that was made about the.
Yeah, I read that.
the ordinance.
That's a jurisdictional thing by a city. A city could do that if they wanted to.
They could. Yep,
Yeah.
the city could do that.
It's not a
Yep.
county's job to do that.
Some counties have. There are some counties that have gone and done that, but it's a big deal. And so it's a lot of work and a lot to it. And people like to pick their own garbage hauler. It seems like people really want to be able to have that freedom to do that. Article 6, again, this is just more of a information about obtaining the process for obtaining a facility license from the PCA, which means getting a land use permit from the county, and that, making sure we have proper record keeping, and then general requirements just to all facilities. What do we expect? If you are going to have a transfer station in the county, what are the expectations that we have for that? Article 7 talks about the different fees and service charges. Article 8 is inspections, violations, and enforcement. And so this is, I think, an ordinance that is needed to be upgraded, needed to be updated and replaced. And I think it's been done really well by Heather with Brent McDonald. And unless there's any real big questions or from the board, the public hearing is set for next Tuesday for this ordinance. Any questions about this one? Okay. We'll jump into the third one, which is our recreational use ordinance. This is an ordinance that is really, I think, been needed for a while. It takes, right now we have some ordinances out there that refer to like deer stands, and that has its own separate ordinance, and there was a separate, it was called a parks ordinance at the time, and what we're proposing to do is to consolidate these ordinances into one for ease of use, so that folks can easily find what are the regulations and requirements for basically recreational uses in Crow Wing County. And so it's broken up into these different sections on county parks and public water accesses or trails, environmental protection, what do we allow as far as camping, and then hunting and trapping, and then what are the violations and penalties for those that would violate the ordinance. If the one change that I did make, it's on, or that Gary and I talked about, was we had a comment on hunting and trapping. Currently, the ordinance says that Hunting stands of any kind will be prohibited within parks or accesses or within 300 feet of a trail. We thought that might be a little far, so we proposed to change that down to a 50-foot, so have a deer stand 50 feet away from a trail. And then to change the trapping to say that trapping of any kind will be prohibited within 300 feet of a trail. So we don't want, if people are out walking around, we don't want traps near those trails so that either people or dogs might get into a trap that would be problematic, I think, so.
So, Chris, I do have one change. And Therese, if you'd go back to the first page. So really get under your skin. Yep, or I want to see number 17. 17? Right, at the beginning of the ordinance.
The definition?
Oh,
Definition
number,
2
I'm sorry, number 27,
2.7?
or 2.7, whatever it
That
is.
motor vehicle one?
Yep,
Okay.
all-terrain is spelled wrong.
What's that?
All-terrain is spelled
Oh,
wrong.
Altarian? Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
And you don't think the commissioners look at this?
No, that's why we bring it here, for that exact reason, so thank you very much for pointing that out.
Usually catch that, and I didn't catch that one.
Appreciate
Thank
that
you.
very much.
Yep, yep, yep.
Are there any questions about the recreation ordinance? It's been through the Natural Resource Advisory Committee, they've looked at it. We had some comments on this that were not really related to anything specifically about this particular one. Was from MHB, wanting to make sure that they were made aware of it, and it followed the comprehensive plan for the MHB. We had some folks that thought we should have some more garbage cans out. We had one from Ken Irish, who is with Iron Rider, out over by in the Crosby area, wanting to ATVs should have access in the county parks to be able to ride your ATVs in county parks to use like picnic sites and bathrooms and then we also had one from Jenny Max up in Nisswa, just wanting some clarification. And then we also got one from Christine Rise with DNR, and she was the one who brought up that 300 feet and the 50 feet as far as trapping and the hunting side. So those were the comments that we received during the comment period. So this is also set to go to the county board next Tuesday for a public hearing.
Yeah, I like this, because before you had it in two different documents.
Yes.
Get it all in one, where it's one place for people to look at and one place for us to kind of discern.
Yes.
This one says this, but oh, this one says that, and so I think it's really good that you're getting that together.
Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay, I'll jump to my last one is more of really kind of an interesting situation. So we have a parcel that we share between Crow Wing County and Aiken County, and it's, let's see, could you maybe show that map? That survey will probably work right there. Yep, and so it's a situation where the property is actually cut in half between Aiken and the.
How does that happen?
It's just the way the parcels line up when you set the boundaries of the county. It's been like that for a long time. I dealt with this back probably around 2014. So they had gone in and got a variance from, applied for a variance to do some activities in their property back in 2014. And it was Aiken, let's see, in 2015, they had some activities that were denied by the Board of Adjustment, and then I spoke with the then zoning administrator, who was Terry Neff, and they didn't feel comfortable taking action on it because it was split down the middle, so they didn't really feel comfortable with that, and we did. And so we took the application and they submitted got a variance to do a few things to make the structure bigger, and they were denied a couple things at the same time. But then we got in contact with the gentleman who's currently has purchased the property and wants to do a short-term rental on the property, but because of the regulations and such in Aiken County, wasn't able to do that because of their requirements over there, especially for sizing requirements. And so I had the idea that we would have a memorandum of agreement with Aiken County that we would assume all of the planning and zoning authority for that parcel, the parcel that is in Crow Wing and in Aiken both. Then any sort of permitting and licensing would all come through us. It'd be easier for this customer. They wouldn't have to, try to figure out how to work with two counties. Nothing changes as far as the tax, the assessment valuing and the taxing. That nothing changes there. It just assigns the planning and zoning authority on this parcel to Crow Wing to handle. And
Do they have to do that as a resolution on their board at all to do that?
yes, and I actually have a copy of we have a memorandum of agreement that's been reviewed by both county attorneys.
Yep.
And this was approved by their board back on October 8th.
Okay.
And so I'm planning, if this is okay with the board, I'd like to bring it to you guys next Tuesday. Just have it be on consent, I think, would just to enter into a memorandum of agreement where we would be the planning and zoning authority for this parcel so that they don't have to try to work between, Crow Wing and Aiken on trying to get things on their property.
So a question for our great county administrator. So does this mean that they can vote in Aiken and in Crow Wing then?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, I think you know the answer to that question.
And I think that's a no.
Well, either that or we're going to have to put a wall up. I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm glad we can work with Aiken County.
Right, we have a great relationship
We
with
have a
staff
great
over there,
relationship
so,
with Aiken,
yeah.
otherwise we'd have to put a
Yep,
wall
they're-
through there.
And they're thrilled, Aiken is thrilled that we're willing to take over the planning and zoning.
Shake
on
your
this
head,
parcel.
Renee. That was a great question.
No, it
Too
wasn't.
big to rig.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I knew that was going to be an interesting one when we got to that.
Yep, it is, but I think it's a good one, so.
So you don't think we need to run any of this by the NRAC committee, do you? Oh, okay.
You already did?
You already did. Weren't you there?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you guys for patiently waiting. We have now Crow Wing Energize coming up.
I bet you guys didn't think we did anything up here on the county board.
Did you have fun watching us?
You always learn a lot.
Same here. We're learning. I'm learning a lot.
Every day I learn more and more.
Learn all kinds of questions I need to learn how to ask.
We are passing out the complete report for the 100 community conversations. We are not going to go over that whole report today, but I brought it to you for your own reference. If you want to take time to read it at some point, feel free to do so. Brought a couple extra copies too.
Okay, I'm Lowell Johnson.
Hi,
I'm a
Lowell.
retired educator. In my retirement, I'm putting my volunteer energy into the Crow Wing Mental Health Alliance, which is a program of Crow Wing Energized, if you're not familiar, the Lakes Area Justice Table, and the WISE Ministry team of First Congregational UCC Church. So I have had the pleasure of working with Karen on both of these projects, but we're going to let Karen start off with a summary of our 100 Conversations project.
So thank you for inviting us, commissioners. This project we did a while ago and really want to share the results with you. I'm Karen, and I just retired in May from 45 years of work, pretty much all in healthcare, orthopedics, and then Crow Wing Energized. As you know, Crow Wing Energized is the movement between Essentia Health, Crow Wing County, so you folks, as well as we received significant funding from the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership. So this is the 100 Community Conversations is a project that we did actually in the midst of COVID. And what it is, what makes it unique is that we actually reached out to people that we normally don't hear from. So these are not people that are going to be gathered here. They're not people that show up for our meetings, typically underserved people. And I think that the results of this were pretty amazing to all of us. So demographic, who was interviewed, on this page, and you'll find this in the complete report on page 5, but you'll see that, number 1, we had 32 respondents. We didn't collect the information. That's not because they didn't want to answer. We just did not have it as a question. So we had it as a note that referenced demographics, gender, where they're from, and we did not collect that information. When we did collect the information, I think what's unique is that you'll see that the ages between 30 and 60, that was 49% of the people that were interviewed. I think if we look at the community health needs assessment that Essentia does every 3 years, and then you have Achina as well, you'll see that that's typically a little older demographic that completes that survey, maybe because of the fact that it's paper. People don't necessarily complete it. It's a long survey, but interestingly, these were younger people. And geographically, as one would expect, this was Crow Wing County, but as you'd expect, we have the most people from Brainerd that identified as being in Brainerd, 44%, or 44 people, 35 in Baxter, and then it should be noted that there were 35 people that identified as the Cuyuna Lakes area. We intentionally worked with CRMC. Next slide. Oh, perfect. Key findings. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised here to see what the findings were. Some of the barriers included housing, both affordability as well as just...
Karen, can I just stop you? Because I was going to ask you, and you just mentioned it. So are you doing some collaboration with Cuyuna Regional Medical Center too?
Yeah.
Because I was just like, that's where I go, and I just think they're absolutely great. And if
Yep.
we're not, it isn't all Essentia. I know Essentia would like to have everything. You know, they built a clinic in Deerwood, which I don't think there was any reason for that, but I hope you're collaborating with Cuyuna, because that's a great place.
We
too.
did, and what was really, really impactful was the last China cycle, so that would have been 6 years ago. We actually reached out to CRMC and said, why are we not using the same survey tool? Surveys are expensive, as you know. So we actually worked together with them. We looked at the questions that we were going to ask in regards to the community health needs assessment. And then also with this project, we intentionally reached out to their community health team and said, let's work together. And we've kind of done that across we serve the same people, Crow Wing County, and we all have different experiences, right? So one person may not be, one size doesn't fit all. So for people to have a choice, and we also have Center Care in the area, so it's not just in Lakewood, so it's not just our area. But that's a great question. Also, access to health care. Barriers there included actually when somebody wanted to get into, as you could probably guess, a mental health provider. This survey was done in the midst of COVID, so we know we had challenges there. On a plus side, I think, was how healthcare responded to electronic visits or e-visits, not electronic, e-visits. That was something that in the past we did not do. So again, with mental health, you can probably see more people when you are actually being able to go electronically. On a plus side, many people referenced our land and nature as a valued asset in our community, and then also the resources that we have in this area, resources that we have at the county. We have so many community-based organizations doing so much good. Next slide. Which community or communities do you identify with? Keep in mind there were 105 people that were interviewed, and they could reply to this in more than one, they could pick more than one category. The highest category were the mental, behavioral health, and recovery. What's not noted here, that of that group, the 43, there were actually people that called out, or there were 20 people that called out that were in recovery, 43 people listed or referenced AA, NA, and the sober squad. Great things happening in our area. People also, the second category was a faith community. Third category was a community member, 37 people replied. We had people that were parents and guardians, 34, and community advocates, 23. We're part of the community advocates. Challenges. This question was, what are the most important needs, barriers, or challenges facing your community? Again, this was called out on the key findings, healthcare, mental health. And people here, a few people referenced finding a provider that suited their need. So for instance, maybe they had a youth that they were trying to get a mental health appointment for. So more specifically, trying to find the provider of their choice and getting it in a timely fashion. Housing, 32 people identified that as a barrier. A lack of housing as well as affordable housing. Diversity, inclusion, and discrimination, challenges with racism, specifically then Latinx, Asian, Native Americans, and LGBTQ communities. I want to give a huge shout out to Crow Wing County and Debbie. Yesterday we gathered here for the second annual Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. It was filled downstairs. We had all of the chairs taken, and it was really meaningful for everybody that was here. I know that sometimes diversity, equity, and inclusion can be, for some reason, words that people do not want to use, but I think that recognizing all of the people that live in our community and being that welcoming community to everybody only benefits all of us as the place we call home. Next slide is, what do you find valuable in your community? Again, the number one thing was community-based support services, 28. And I think this is the time to pat yourself on the back. Crow Wing County, in my experience before I started to work with Crow Wing Energized, had no idea of all the good things that are happening. There are so many things that are happening within that county where they support the needs of our community. And we have a lot of community-based organizations, nonprofits, wanting to do the right thing. Family, friends, people that care for you, 23. That's really important that we know that there's people out there that have our backs, right, that care about us. Land and nature, our parks and trails, they were called out again, thank you. Those things cost money. And there's only so much money that we have in our budget, so land and nature is a really high priority for people. And then public spaces. Both the shop and the library had 4 people that referenced that they were important to them out of the 105. The next slide is the community experiences and perceptions. This is a busy slide. You'll find 4 different questions that relate to this. I personally thought this might be something that you're really interested in. Again, it's busy. So if you pay attention, I tell people either look at the green or look at the blue. I mean the orange or the blue. So that top one is there are opportunities to share ideas with community policymakers. I consider all of you and respect all of you for being our community policymakers. I happen to know that you're very approachable. I've reached out to my own Commissioner Rosemary and really appreciate that. But I think that that's something to take away, is that people strongly disagreed with that statement at 46. On the plus side, if you look down at the bottom, there are people in my community that I can turn to for help. We know that that's important, that people realize that people care and you can reach out. 76% strongly agreed with that statement. The last slide I'm going to go over, next slide, is the work to date. So like I mentioned, this is what we've worked on, Crow Wing Energized, so Crow Wing County Essentia Health, but our partnership was really deeper than that with Family Wise Services in the Minnesota Department of Health. So 105 cups of coffee is what it was originally labeled. That's not something that we just made up. This is actually a campaign. This is actually tried and true from Minnesota Department of Health and Family Wise. And there was more than one step to this. We followed the self-healing approach. So before we even did this piece of it, we did some things. We educated our community about neurobiology, epigenetics, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. So that happened long before I became part of Crow Wing Energized. The man to my right, Lowell's been passionate about that, knows a lot about the brain. and has been passionate about leading the ACEs in our community. That's something that you can ask for from Crow Wing Energized to come and do a presentation. They'll do that to 3 people up to probably 20 people, but in any community-based organization, faith community. And then we also conducted the 3rd phase of this, which was we've hosted 2 adverse childhood experience presenter trainings, interface presenter trainings, which was significantly, you can imagine the cost of that. So we've been able to offer that twice in Crow Wing County. And then lastly was this phase that we did, the 100 cups of coffee. We called it 105 because we're overachievers and did 105 one-on-one hour interviews with people to get this data. And phase 4, Lowell's going to talk about, and this was our kind of boots on the ground. What did we do with the information? We had a project we called Bold Yet Seldom Told.
Okay, so we're passing out copies of the Bold Yet Seldom Told book to each of you. And this project really, those of us who were doing the interviews during the 100 Conversations project had an experience that we're calling an empathy stretch. When you sit down and talk with somebody who's had a very different life experience than your own, you get empathy and you are stretched and learn something about how somebody else, what their life has been like. So the idea then evolved into, could we increase empathy and compassion in the community by telling the stories of these folks that we were interviewing? So we settled off on that, and again, our target audience was the same as for 100 Conversations. So it was people who are, big categories, marginalized, so that means a lived experience of mental illness, addiction, disability, incarceration, LGBTQ plus folks, black and brown skinned people. Sometimes the parents are caregivers of those folks. So we asked them to write if they would be willing to share their story, and they all said yes, and it resulted in the publication of the Bold Yet Seldom Told book. So we had our book launch back in April. As part of the effort, we received money from the Opioid Settlement Fund and purchased 440 books to be distributed free in the recovery and mental health community. So, because people learn and grow through stories is the basic idea. This slide is at our book launch, the folks who were there who contributed in some way. In addition to the book, we also did a series of videos, 10 videos, which are available on the Crow Wing Energized website, of people who wrote their stories, telling their stories in video form, because believe it or not everybody reads, but people watch screens. So that's a way to get some insight into some of these folks. And just a little bit of background about measurement of success. I have to say, we don't have the capacity to do a really sophisticated follow-up because basically we have no money or staff people to do that. However, we have held a couple book clubs. The ones I was involved in were one at the Crow Wing County Jail, one at the shop. We did a 2-session book club. We did an evaluation of those, and on a 5-point scale, each of those 2 book clubs received 4.3 out of 5, a rating of 5. So that's some data. The informal feedback we've gotten from people who've read the book and talked about it is very positive. And I guess I'm a literacy guy, right? So I taught reading comprehension. And I'm going to start with, a book has no value unless somebody reads it. But a book has added value if you talk to somebody about what's in the book. And this is called making connections in reading comprehension terms. So if Rosemary and I both read something and then we get a chance to talk about it, she is probably going to have a little bit slightly different take on it, or maybe a big different take on it than I do, because we have different life experiences. So it's the communication about the content in the stories where the real learning takes place. And hopefully progress in more empathy and more compassion for others in our community. So that's what I've got to say, and I'll take a few questions if there's time.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, I don't have a question for either of you, but I appreciate this book to take a look at the marginalized communities. We're going to have a change in workforce in our, I mean, it's already happening. I don't think we acknowledge it enough, but this is going to have an impact on our community. And I think that we have to understand that this is our community. And these people live here. They have stories to tell. We all do, and we should embrace every one of us, because to your point, Lowell, two people have two different views of the same issue. And so unless we're looking at each other as quality human beings, we're missing the point of life, as far as I'm concerned. So
Appreciate that. And as the efforts go forward, one thing, Karen and I have presented at a number of professional conferences about this project. And if it's appropriate for anything that's organized through the county, we can get people whose stories are in the book to come and tell their story. I mean, I can read their story. I love all the stories in the book, but the story is more powerful or it comes from the person who wrote it rather than me reading it. So I'll just offer that up to you.
I think it's interesting for me is to say that you put this together these are just people. This is not like a group that you found or a group that they're just, how did you get the names? How do they show up for those 105 cups?
Okay, well, let's see. For the book project, some of the folks who were interviewed for 100 community conversations wrote stories, but otherwise it was just sort of the network, because we are connected with people who work in the recovery communities. Think the 12-step programs. I remember one interview I did with a guy who was at the Crystal Meth Anonymous group at Upfront Alno Club, and as we completed the interview, he was saying, this group is like family to me. If you read his story, you'll see that his family life was not positive. But now that he's in recovery and been clean and sober for I can't remember how many years, those 12-step groups are huge. So our two area Alno clubs need to be recognized for all the good work they're doing. And then, yeah, it was just who do you know? And again, I don't know how to say, the network asked people, and I'll just say another thing. Of the people who were asked and said yes, only about 2/3 actually submitted a draft, and I put that up to busyness and writing skills. And even though we didn't have editors to help, there's a lot more stories out there than are contained in the book. So.
And we had actually, Lowell and I both attended a workshop. It was, we did it virtually, but they talked about, it was two different cities, Robbinsdale, cannot remember the other city, but we actually learned about this 100 cups of coffee. It's a standardized, pretty well standardized survey so that you can actually compare your data to other spots. So we really took that data, and then we reached out, we really worked with Crow Wing Energized with the mental health task group, and first identified reaching out to our partners, which we have a lot of people that are represented from, you can imagine, from the healthcare world, including Nystrom and Associates, Northern Pines. Most of the mental health providers were there. So we initially started with them, started with the recovery community, and then one thing we found early on was to ask people that were interviewed and said, hey, do you have a recommendation of somebody that you think might want to sit and do this interview? Because they really had to trust that we were going to do this, we were going to respect their information. None of us want to hear negative things, right? I just want to hear all the good things. But you have to listen to understand and to realize that you're never going to make 100% of the people happy, as you all know. You really have to be open, non-judgmental, but that's how we really found was that it was those soft handoffs. So then when we contacted the next person, we could say that Karen Johnson said you may be a person that want to help with this. We reached out to CLC, they were part of it, the students there. So we really had a wide variety of people to ask to participate in the actual one-on-one interviews. And I think it was helpful having it in person instead of, like I mentioned, doing a survey online. This was in person that, you could, the conversation flows a little bit easier.
Thank you. Anything else from the board in regards? You have anything? Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
all
Thank
you
you for your
do.
time.
Yeah.
And
thank
your
you.
good work.
Reach out anytime if you have questions.
Thank you.
That's all we have today, Mr. Chair.
Well, then we are adjourned. Thank you. It'll give me time to get up to Pequot.